you've been lied to about one of the most iconic stories in the history of science. Newton, the apple, gravity. It didn't happen the way you think. And once you hear the real version, you'll never see that story the same again. Think about the story you've been told for years. Newton sitting under a tree, an apple falls on his head, and suddenly he discovers gravity. But what if I told you that this story never actually happened? Yes, maybe you've seen it in school books, maybe in films. It's famous, no doubt. But the truth? It has almost nothing to do with what really happened. Today, here at Mystic Archives, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the biggest myths in the history of science. This isn't just about a story, it's about how easily people can be convinced. And if you want to uncover the hidden truths of history, hit subscribe, because what we share here breaks the script. Have you ever asked yourself this question? A scientist, one of the greatest geniuses in history, discovers a universal law just because a fruit hit his head. This is one of the most repeated stories in science history, but also one of the least questioned. So now, let's rewind a bit, back to Newton's time. The year is 1666. A plague is spreading across Europe. Newton is away from university, staying at his family's farm. His mind focused on understanding the physical world. But in all the notes he wrote during that time, not once does he mention an apple falling on his head. That detail, the apple hitting Newton's head, didn't show up until after his death. And the man who introduced it, William Stukeley. Stukeley was one of the first to write Newton's biography. And in his memoirs, he wrote this: "We were sitting in the garden. He saw an apple fall, and he asked himself, why does it always fall straight down? Why not sideways? Why not upward? That's all. No impact, no slapstick, no apple bouncing off his head like in a cartoon." And this is where the human brain steps in. The simpler and more symbolic a story is, the easier it spreads. Over time, that quiet moment turned into a dramatic legend. An apple hit Newton's head and he discovered gravity. The truth is far more complex and far more impressive. Newton's mind didn't get stuck on a falling apple. He was chasing a deeper truth, a universal order. He looked to the skies, trying to understand the moon's motion around the earth. He looked to the ground, searching for a link between a falling apple and the orbit of planets. This wasn't a sudden moment of inspiration. It was a question built on mathematics. And Newton's true genius, it wasn't the question he asked himself. If an apple falls to the ground, then why doesn't the moon? If gravity pulls everything downward, why doesn't the moon fall too? Why does it stay in orbit? That's the puzzle he set out to solve. And after years of thinking, calculating, observing, in 1687 he published his masterpiece, Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. It laid the foundation for modern physics, and it was the first time gravity wasn't just about Earth, it applied to the entire universe. Newton described gravity as a force. Every object in the universe pulls on every other object in proportion to its mass, and the farther apart two objects are, the weaker that pull becomes. This idea didn't just explain why apples fall, it explained the orbits of planets, the tides, the motion of the moon, the dance of celestial bodies. So no, Newton didn't discover gravity in a moment. He uncovered it through years of questions, calculations, and brilliant thinking. And yes, maybe an apple really did fall, but the discovery didn't start with that fall. It started with thought. Sometimes, the simpler the idea, the longer it lasts. And the story of Newton and the falling apple, that's exactly what it became. The human mind loves symbols. Instead of complex theories, equations, or abstract concepts, we prefer a scene where, boom, an idea strikes like lightning. Because those kinds of stories, they inspire us. They whisper, "Look, even he figured it out in an instant, so why not me?" That's why the apple story became a legend in the 19th century, especially in England. Newton was turned into a national hero. Newspapers, magazines, children's books, everyone repeated the apple story because it was simple, it was fun, and it made Newton feel more human. A genius hit by a falling fruit. Suddenly he was someone the public could relate to. But that simplicity came with a price. Newton's months of calculations, his sleepless nights staring at the stars, were forgotten, replaced by a single falling apple. And the story grew so big, it still appears in school books today. But that's not science, that's marketing. So here's the real question. While the myth was spreading, what did Newton himself say? In none of his published works during his lifetime is there a clear mention of the apple incident. But according to some conversations with friends, shortly before his death, he did mention it. In William Stukeley's biography from 1726, Newton supposedly said, "I saw an apple fall from a tree, and I thought, why does it always fall straight down? Not sideways, not upward. It must be, because the earth pulls it." So, yes, there was an observation, but not an apple smashing into his head. It began with a thought, a quiet moment of curiosity. Some sources say Newton didn't mind the story being told. Maybe he wanted people to take interest. Maybe he knew it had a public relations effect, but he never exaggerated it himself. To those close to him, he wasn't a man struck by sudden inspiration. He was a man who studied, calculated, and worked for years. And this shows us something important. The legend of Newton didn't come from Newton himself. It came from a society that needed a symbol, a genius with a lightning strike moment, and the apple became the perfect symbol for that. Newton's apple isn't alone. History of science is full of stories where fact and fiction blend together, like Archimedes supposedly shouting "Eureka" while running naked from a bath. That image burned into our minds. But the story is probably embellished, told much later with dramatic flair. Or Galileo dropping balls of different weights from the Tower of Pisa to prove they fall at the same speed. There's no real proof that ever happened. Yet, it still shows up in books. These myths sell the dream of instant enlightenment. They turn science into hero tales. But real science is patience, doubt, and repeating the same thing over and over. So, is that a bad thing? Maybe not. Because some stories spark thought. They lead a child to discover science. They create curiosity. And sometimes that's where it all begins. But we must remember this. Stories are great for starting, but the journey must lead to truth. Maybe an apple never hit Newton on the head, but he did something far greater. He looked up at the sky, and that's where the real discovery began. If you enjoy these mysterious, thought-provoking, and myth-busting stories, then Mystic Archives is the place for you. Because here, we don't settle for what's told. We dig deep for what's true. We clear away legends and bring light to the mind through the dust of the past. Subscribe for new videos, because the next story we uncover might reveal an even bigger lie. See you next time.